Welcome to Creative. Today I'm going to be interviewing Tony Qunta, who's a guitarist and a multi-instrumentalist, and it's a fascinating talk, and we got so involved we didn't realise how much time was slipping by. So this is going to be in two episodes, so there'll be another one in a couple of weeks' time. So yes, without further ado, on to the interview. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Tony Qunta, but I want, Tony, to start with, I think you should say your name as it really is.
Okay, well my surname really should be Qunta.
Cool. So it's a Kosa.
It is Qunta. From my dad.
That's lovely, that's lovely. I think that's such an amazing sound. The sort of clip languages are just, they're mesmerising, aren't they?
It is. I don't know if it's the only language in the world that has that clicks. I'm not too sure. I've never researched it.
I don't know. Might be interesting to do.
Yeah.
But my normal first question, Tony, is what do you do?
I have no idea. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, I interviewed somebody yesterday who said that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I do work as a musician. First, professionally, that's all I've done really all my life, and mainly playing guitar.
Yeah.
Mostly electric guitar, but I do play acoustic. I play violin as well, and electric violin, not that often, and dabble with keyboards because that was my first instrument when I was a little kid, and I sing as well.
Cool.
And I write music.
Yeah, cool. So let's take you back to the beginnings. How did you get involved? What started you off?
With music, in my household, it was very difficult not to have at least an interest in music, because my dad loved music, particularly classical music.
Right.
My mum, she probably liked classical music more, but all music, but she was, by all accounts, a very, very good pianist when she was younger. I mean, in fact, I think she had a kind of what you could call thwarted purpose as a musician in some sort of way, because every now and again she would play the piano. We always had a piano in our household, and every now and again she would sit at the piano and play just from memory some Chopin and some difficult music that she used to play when she was about 12.
Right.
And I think her family, one of her aunts was some kind of a concert type pianist, so she had a big love of music, and so both my parents loved music. My two sisters were actually really stepsisters. They were somewhat older than my brother and myself, probably about 10 years older, something like that, and they were into, at the time, this was like the late 50s, they were into Elvis, jazz. One of my sisters liked, particularly modern jazz. Thelonious Monk. She had a record by Thelonious Monk, which I thought, when I was a little kid, my sister said she had this record, I've forgotten what one it was, and she'd mentioned Thelonious Monk, and I thought she'd said The Loneliest Monk. So for a long time I thought it was The Loneliest Monk.
Strange, actually, because that might have been part of, almost sort of summed up his character in the early days, because he was a bit sort of ostracised, wasn't he? Because he was so different. So it's probably quite accurate.
Yeah, so I had, I was always hearing classical music, the pop music of the day, I suppose you call it, from the 50s, some jazz like that, and I was probably about 3 years old when I heard Finlandia by Sibelius, that my older of my two sisters had, And I remember that was, from what I remember, that was kind of the first time where music really got me here, my heart. You know, it was like, wow. And I always remember I was just blown away by it. Just the emotion of it. And
so how old were you then?
About 3 when I remember hearing that. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is incredible that you can remember that. Even like the fact that the impact of that must have been just astonishing.
It was like, wow, you know. And I don't know if I thought, oh, I want to be a musician then.
No.
So much. I don't think I thought consciously in that sort of way. It was more my interest and my love of music just went out the roof from then.
Yeah.
And then when I was 6, something like that, well, my brother, who's a couple of years older than me, 2.5 years older, he had piano lessons. My mum not packed us off, they had somebody come into the house actually at the time, a very good piano teacher, the lady, she's lovely, and had piano lessons, like I say, when I was 6, classical stuff.
Right.
And,
So you had, that's a massive musical input right early on.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, so with the piano then, so this is your first instrument, and you said you had a really nice teacher, so that sort of really sort of sets the scene that you enjoyed piano.
I did, particularly at the beginning.
Yeah.
But my brother and I were packed off to a boarding school.
Oh, okay.
So when I was sort of like, I don't know, 8, something like that, only just 8.
Right.
And so obviously I had a different music teacher.
Yeah.
And so then I did the piano with that teacher. He was a very, very good musician who really wanted to be a musician and a composer. And he was a very good teacher in a way, but he had, if you got on the wrong side of him, he was not, he was not nice.
No.
I was lucky because I was probably one of the better kind of students, as it were. Yeah. And so I didn't get wasn't on the receiving end many times from his wrath. No. But I saw some other people that were, But I had piano lessons. Then 8 or 9, I had violin lessons. The piano was going pretty well, but the violin, I instantly took to it much more.
Right.
Somehow, and off I went with the violin. I did pretty good with that for a while.
Okay. This is. I like it when people say I did pretty well. You sort of think, and how well is pretty well, because you obviously did very well. But
well, I did for a while. It's interesting with the violin because I did, what was it, grade 5 within about 3 years. I think.
Yeah, okay.
And so then I was like the star pupil at the school, really. And
so what school was that?
It was a school in North Wales called Heron Water. It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Near Colwyn Bay, up in North Wales. There, it was a really lovely environment. Yeah. With the mountain and the hills and all that, and they had a lake, they had a stream. It
sounds like Hogwarts. Sounds a bit like Hogwarts. Harry Potter.
Probably wasn't as much fun as Hogwarts.
No, probably not. No. I was going to say it was dangerous, but no. It might have been though. So I'm quite intrigued by this because it's almost like you're in an environment that seems very musical, even in that situation.
Very much so.
Even though that maybe a lot of the people that were your peers that weren't particularly that musical, the environment was musical.
Yeah.
Is that safe?
You mean at school?
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, they were very good with sports and music and things like that. They had a little orchestra and things like that. And like I say, I don't know, I hadn't thought of it for a long time until you sort of asked me about that. That I ended up sort of, for what it was worth, the leader of the orchestra, this little school orchestra. Yeah. And I was tended to be held up as a bit of a good example.
Yeah.
As that went. As it happened, something happened at that school which stayed with me for a very long time
Right.
later, that knocked my confidence.
Right.
It was interesting, and it stayed with me in terms of whenever I've taught guitar quite a lot, particularly, and has stayed with me of something what not to do.
Yes.
As an example, and that was where they used to have a concert, like schools have a concert, you know, at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I remember this particular concert, I'd done grade 5 violin or something like that. Yeah, I had, yeah. And so this was like the summer concert, and I was supposed to play some piano piece, which I did, and a violin piece from grade 5. And this is like the teacher I was obviously like the star pupil. All the parents were there and everything, and I think at the time some people are very natural performers and they're kind of full of it, and I was not like that. In some ways I didn't find it that easy.
Yeah.
I love music, but performing was not as natural to me as some people. But I could do it, you know. But I remember playing this particular piece. The music teacher introduced me, blah, 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 blah. I didn't play it as well as I probably could have done. Through nerves, I think. And the guy, in front of all the parents, all the school, he said, because they used to call you by your second name at this private school, he said, Qunta will now play this. I think he didn't play it that well. He will now play it again.
Oh, right.
And I felt deflated, because to be kind of criticised in front of people in that way, and that's one of the things I remembered never do. Not that I wasn't really natural to do something like that to somebody, but I was aware of the thing, how easy it is to deflate somebody's confidence by doing something like that. And it stayed with me for a very long time, that experience. It was sort of the reverse of building up somebody's confidence.
Absolutely.
You know?
Totally. I mean,
experience.
you know, I'm involved in lots of psychological aspects of things, and that's one of those things that, if you like, because when you do exam, for instance, you've got to be very, very careful how you speak to a candidate, because you can just destroy their state of mind in a matter of a few sentences. And I've witnessed that type of thing happen, not with people that I know, but from the point of view of being a teacher at a school where an examiner's come in to do the associated board exams or whatever, and made some comment to somebody just doing, like grade 2 violin, that's just completely ruined this kid's confidence before the exam actually starts. And you think, that's shocking. That's so, well, we'd say unprofessional now. But I just think, whether that comes from and maybe this is true of a certain type of person that you got as a teacher back in the day. Because I can think of a few people like that, you think, they shouldn't have been in teaching. Like you were saying about, there were a lot of people there who really wanted to be a performer and a composer. They didn't really want to be a teacher, but that's where they could earn their money.
Yeah.
And they're not suited to that. And they almost hold a grudge about the fact that that they're actually doing that, weirdly. And that's interesting. So that stayed with you. Did it change your attitude to what you did musically, would you say?
Not in terms of music itself.
No, but to do with
it's
the
more
violin.
to do with not even to do with the violin. I don't think so. It's more to do with performing.
Right.
Because I think, it didn't really influence anything. Like I say, my interest in music or anything like that.
No.
I was just so besotted with music, with classical, and more by that time pop, really, the Beatles, all these different bands and so forth. I was immersed in it. There was nothing would sort of tarnish that kind of side of it. It was purely, like I say, to do with performing. And I think like I say, I don't think it's like unlike some people who just they can't get enough of performing. They just, I was always a musician first, and performing. Obviously, you want to perform your art form to people, which it took me quite a long time, I think, to feel very comfortable doing that. But at that time, it was sort of like a bad time, if you know what I mean. One's formative years of building their confidence as a performer as well as a musician, say, as their art form. And so, but I think the guy, he wasn't trying to be unhelpful.
No.
I mean, he was a great musician, and like I say, he was very supportive of me.
Yeah.
I think he couldn't handle the idea of because I think he's like some people. I've come across some teachers. They have quite a big motivation as a teacher, and the idea of nurturing people.
Yeah.
And up to a point, it doesn't matter those person's natural ability. The person will still be very supportive. This guy was very supportive of me, but not very supportive, I could see, of other people that weren't naturally so able.
Yeah.
Put it that way. So I think when he got me to do that performance again, he wasn't doing it to try to be nice.
No.
He just felt probably frustrated. He would probably thought, I've heard him play it much better.
Yes.
I know he could play it. He didn't think.
No. But that's often what happens. It's not done with any malicious intent. But I mean, the classic example of that I've heard a lot from people is when you talk to somebody and you're so late. There's an example that I can use, but this is just one example of many. There was somebody we were doing some improvisation, and this guy, he'd been playing the guitar for quite some time, and he'd started taking grades and what have you. I mean, he'd been playing guitar for years, but when we started getting to the point of him doing grades, he'd been having lessons with me for about a year, I think, and we were talking about improvisation, and he suddenly said to me, I just, because everything was sort of standing like a bit of a scale. Okay, this is sort of, because he was an adult, and he was a professional, I don't know, doctor or something. He'd done university, let's put it that way. And they're often, many people are very fixed in their thinking, right? So I said, well, you just have to hear it. You just have to imagine you're talking through the instrument. And he just wasn't getting it. So I then said to him, who told you that you weren't musical? Because it was a lie. Right. And he said, oh my God. It was literally like that. It just suddenly triggered something. He said, I think I must have been about 6 or 7. And we had a little school choir. And we're all, let's all sing, see who can be in the choir type of thing. It was that type of thing. And the lady, who was the music teacher, went up to people, including him, tapped him on the shoulder and said, you can't sing. That was it. So she was literally thinning out the people that she wanted to. But of course, coming from that sort of the psychological thing, that's like anchoring a command from somebody in authority that suddenly you're not good enough. And you think, and that's not the only case of that, and it's often to do with people not being allowed to sing in a choir, right? As a kid. Instead of just thinking, well, come on, just, let's just sing, type of thing, that type of approach. And then, by nurturing and allowing people to unfold, if you like, as musically, you get this sort of thing, because they want the pristine, all this lot are really the best. And I think that's probably where that type of thing comes from in your experience. The guy,
Absolutely.
it's not malicious. They don't mean to mess somebody's musical life up for them. But this guy had carried this, and he was in his 40s,
Wow.
and it took him back to like he'd forgotten it until because I just thought there's something there which was weird, because the guy could play, but it was just so unmusical. It's like he just didn't believe in himself somehow. And I just said that, and it just literally triggered that off. So I think that's quite a common thing.
Yeah.
So for you, because because you're driven by that music, and it was so embedded in your life right from the early, and it was it was really part of your identity, I would say.
True.
So then you carried on with that, and when did the guitar appear on the scene?
When I was about 13, I went to a different school. Oh, well, actually, my brother had already started guitar. So while we were still at this boarding school, I would have been 10, something like that. By that time, my brother's two or 3 years older than me, had started playing guitar. And I really wanted to play guitar because I'd seen Hank Marvin and people like that. And I loved, I'd seen a picture with the red strap. Is that a red strap? Anyway.
Those still were,
Anyway, he had this beautiful red strat that apparently was the one that Cliff Richard got as the first strat in the UK or something. And it was on one of their EPs or something. And I thought, I want to play that thing. And I loved the sound of it and all that. So I really wanted to play guitar. But I had this thing, although I always got on well with my brother, really well. But at the same time, there was something about it. I thought, he's playing the guitar. I really want to play the guitar, but I don't want to do the same as what he's doing. So then, I thought, I love playing the drum. I love the drum. I hadn't played the drums, but I loved hearing the drums. And I remember seeing one of the guys, Tony Meehan, with the Shadows, on some of their records, just some great little solos and things. And I got interested in the drums. And I used to, at that time, they didn't have obviously the internet or anything like that. You could send away for magazines about equipment. And I used to write off, and for these kind of brochures I'd get for different drum kits, and I used to look through these.
Well, they were magical, weren't they, those things? Because I did the same thing with guitar. I did. It was like having a picture. If you couldn't afford the guitar, the next best thing was to have a picture of it on your wall.
Absolutely. So then I went with these pictures of drum kits, and then I started having drum lessons from a guy local. I think my dad. He might have been, because my dad was a medical doctor, a GP, and I think it was one of his patients. He used to play drums, kind of like, part-time or whatever you call it, in clubs. This is in the north of England, near where we lived. And so I had a couple of drum lessons from him, and my parents bought me what would have been a pretty cheap kind of start-off snare drum, and it had this little thing with a cymbal attached to it, and I started off with that. Then I got a bass drum, quite a cheap bass drum, and so on. And so then I was playing drums, and my brother was playing guitar. We used to do. My dad had this tape recorder. We used to tape the guitar, the drums, and some vocals sort of at the same time. Things like that we got around. I remember I did this at school. They had a Shakespeare play. Now, what was it? What was the one with the fairies in it?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream, that's it. I think it was that one. And for some reason, the music teacher wrote me into doing something where I was playing a little snare drum.
Right.
As part of some scene.
Right.
And at that school, it was actually very beautiful, like I was saying, in Wales. And one of the kind of playground areas was actually a little, what do you call it? By a copse. Of
like a little wood. Grove.
Yeah, a grove or something like that. And they had these rhododendron bushes, they're famous for around there, apparently. And that was the backstage. Wow. So I remember, like I was about 10 or 11, 10 probably, I think, being backstage in the rhododendron sort of bit with my little snare drum playing something.
Fantastic. That sounds great.
Quite weird, actually.
Yeah. Sounds like a good gig.
Yeah, but like I say, I got into drums to some degree then, and the guitar. But I really wanted to play the guitar. There was probably when I was about 12 or 13. I went to a different boarding school, and one of my best mates in my year played a bit of classical guitar. By this time, Jimi Hendrix had just arrived on the scene, and we were both besotted with Hendrix. And this guy used to teach me a bit of guitar stuff, and we used to try and work out things from our Experienced album.
Yeah. That's amazing, isn't it?
So that was it. That was where I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. I had a friend who was a percussionist, and Barry, he said, because he'd been involved in bands in the 60s, and I said to him one day, what was the musicianship like then? I mean, from the point of view of, he said, well, it was just very different. He said, because most of the things that were out there you could do, right? He said there were the odd song that you wouldn't touch with a barge pole because, there was a couple of Beatles songs you wouldn't do because the harmonies were just like, forget it, And he said, but most of the stuff was, you could do it, It was. He said, but I can tell you, that all changed overnight. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, well, what was that then? He said, Purple Haze. He said, because when that happened, he said, because Hey Joe was, that was just like, this is a good song. Good guitar solo. He said, but when Purple Haze came out, it was like, what is happening? And he said, all the guitarists sort of disappeared, off to practice up, trying to work out what was going on. So again, it would have been those first couple of albums, Hendrix's albums, just to like, what? Because it was like he deconstructed guitar, And he said, and then you started getting people doing crazy things trying with the guitar, because it suddenly lost its sort of formality. Somehow.
Yeah.
So I thought that's interesting, that impact. And to be honest, I think that's still true now when you sort of look back at Hendrix, because you can be playing guitar and then go, yeah, but hang on a minute, Hendrix was doing this. And every time you listen to a Hendrix recording, it's like, I didn't spot that before. And you might have been listening to that for 30, 40 years, and you go like, did he actually do that? I didn't realise. Sort of like just never ending.
There was a lot more going on, and at the time, I think, when I was learning that stuff, I understood part of what he was doing, or what his musical knowledge was, or something like that. And it was later I'd listen to stuff and think, I did realise I didn't, because I think he was not, obviously Hendrix was not an academic musician. No. But that doesn't mean somebody doesn't know stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Intuitively, or they've heard stuff or something like that.
Yeah.
And, I've heard of people say, Jeff Beck's an example. I remember I used to love Jeff Beck, probably even before Hendrix, with some of the stuff he did before that. And when was it now? When he came out with Blow by Blow, I actually went, when I lived in Hastings, they used to go out and play with this little band out in the village out in the sticks there, not far from there, and it was somewhere near where Jeff Beck lived.
Yeah.
And still does, I think.
Sort of Waterloo.
Yeah. And I remember this guy had, invited Jeff Beck to his party. This guy is a bit of a more than just a bit of a musician, but anyway.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, Jeff might come to my party. I said, yeah, right, yeah, sure he will, I thought, Jeff Beck, he's not going to come to your party. I went to the party, and he turned up.
Yeah.
So this other friend of mine, who's into guitar as well, we were both, he was very nice, very nice, easy to talk to, and we were both kind of picking his brains about blow by blow and all that. I remember this other guy. Was it? What was? There was one. It was a cover that he did on there.
What Cause We Wonder Desires?
It wasn't that one actually.
Right.
There's another one on there. It's either that one or on Wired.
Oh.
It's one of those tunes, more jazzy tunes. You
Yeah.
know.
Oh, the Mingus number.
Yeah. I think,
Goodbye Pork Pie.
yes, I think it was that.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Wired was out as well.
Yeah.
I think he asked about that, and he was asking something about, what chords you were playing, Jeff. It's kind of the kind of question. And Jeff Beck literally said, "Well, I don't know really," And I thought, somebody could be saying that just for effect, but you could tell he meant it.
Yeah,
he
yeah.
didn't really know technically what he was playing.
No.
It's interesting, but he's another one I would say is a very intuitive
Yeah,
musician.
yeah,
What
yeah.
a great musician.
Oh my God.
And,
it's astonishing. I mean, particularly when you hear him do the Les Paul stuff, because I saw him once and he did a sort of Les Paul Mary Ford track
Yeah.
on a Les Paul guitar, and it was just like somebody had flicked a switch and he'd become somebody else. It was just brilliant, because it just sounded the Les Paul sound.
Yeah.
Even to the point that it sounded like it was sort of multi-tracked. You know what I mean? Because all
Because
that
it was
stuff
his hero, wasn't it?
yeah. He was so into that sort of playing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that jazz thing. Because I mean, going to the that Charlie Mingus track. I mean the chords. Okay, it's Max Middleton playing keys on there, if I remember rightly, and some of them are just so off the wall. I mean, they're in that sort of vibe of the sort of late sort of bebop type chord moves and that, what's his face? He did stuff with Miles Davis's band. It's those sort of very angular type chords that you get in that sort of Dorian stuff. They're just literally moving around. There's no real tone centre. And it's all that type of stuff going on in the back. And it's like, if you've got a guy who can do that jazz stuff, from a guitar point of view, it's a bit like you're scratching the surface, even when you really, when you sort of know what you're doing. A keyboard player can do all that, and it's like, you're always a few steps behind, aren't you? Really? So I think the best way is, probably having a damn good ear, which obviously, guitarists of our period of time, you had to work it off the record. I mean, you couldn't get a decent music book that was even in the right damn key for the chords, let alone anything else, could you? So
that's true.
So once you got the guitar underway, then and you're working all this Hendrix stuff out, I'm guessing that all your musical training, particularly with the violin being a stringed instrument, must have had a really good effect for guitar. You must have picked things up quite. Yeah, but you wouldn't necessarily, because if you've been, all that sort of musical training is already in your head, and you just pick an instrument up, and there's lots of stuff you don't even have to think about because it's sort of you're already there with it, aren't you?
I think that certainly that what you were saying about having to listen to stuff because there were no books and all that. That's one reason that it develops your ear, I think, because you have to be listening and working something out. That obviously develops your kind of musical ear, as it were. And the violin, I'm sure, helped, and the piano as well, helped to some degree. I would think with guitar, I'm not really aware how much the training, as it were, at that stage that I had with the classical stuff helped, because by that time, I still was playing the piano, having lessons and stuff at school, and the fiddle. But the work, I wouldn't call it work, but anyway, the energy, if you like, and the time was going into listening to the records, and it was like in the old days where you had the vinyl, picking up the needle, slowing it down, all of that.
Yeah, and finding a record player that could do 16 BPM, RPM.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that
somebody that could play a linguophone record that you could, So the thing about when I think about
Because when you asked me that, my first thought was, did it? You know, it probably did to some degree.
I think it does, because, I
Mm.
mean, and it's that sort of thing that you wouldn't know it does.
Yeah.
Because a lot of guitar, well, you probably experienced this when if you teach people, if you get somebody comes to you and they've got another instrument on the go and they do guitar, things like practice and, you know, scales, the fact that, you know, scales are an integral part of learning and all that sort of, that's almost unsaid. They know that already. This is the type of thing I mean.
Yeah.
The groundwork has been done. You get somebody new to it, all of this stuff has to be learnt or has to be understood. You know, the fact that practice is, you've got to practice, otherwise it's just... And also the sort of, the map, the musical map in your head about how all of that stuff sort of fits together, that has to happen somehow.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's that type of thing I'm getting at. If you've done,
Yeah.
you've played, and it doesn't really matter whether it's classical or it's contemporary or whatever, because it's the language. You know,
Yeah.
it's the language. Okay, it's slightly different. The language is different, but it is. You know, there's a sort of a subtext. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think with me, I did know obviously a lot more than I would have done if I hadn't had
Yes.
piano and
Yeah.
violin lessons. Having said that, some people take to the academic, theoretical side of things better than others, and I was not one of those.
No.
So when I was having piano lessons, I did, you know, like some people, for example, I have a nephew, he's a fantastic musician actually, and he, from when he was very young, became a very good pianist and all of that, but he's got it all really. He's a good improviser and all that now. But I remember when he was learning piano, when he was very young, he could sight read stuff from the off very well.
Yeah.
And that was something I was almost like, I would sit there and, you know, what's the word, they call it word blindness, what do they call it now?
Yeah, it's sort of like dyslexia.
Just a bit dyslexia, it's that type of effect
Yeah.
I had with music, and I used to just like, there was something about it, I would just sit there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and if I could, once I knew how a piece went by ear, then off I went. And the music teachers at that time
Yeah.
very often were saying, look at the music, you know, blah, 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 and I was like, because I would just look at it and something happened in my mind.
Yeah. Do you know, I
It's
think
like,
that is a very interesting point, because I do think there is a sort of music dyslexia, right? And because I think I've got it.
Oh, right.
Although I can read and everything, I'm
Yeah.
not, you know, as soon as you've got a good ear, it's like, it's obvious it goes there, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's all, and then if you can hear something and go, yeah, okay. And occasionally you think, oh, what's that? Oh yeah. And then that's, you don't need it anymore.
Mm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I reckon actually that might go with the territory of guitar. Because there's something about the guitar that sets it aside, sets it outside the parameter of a lot of other instruments. I mean, if you watch somebody, I was going to say the violin, but you know, there's also the fact that, you know, the fiddle, you know, styles may sort of be an exception to that. But if you take a classical instrument where it's so embedded in classical, you know, flute or cello or something like that, where you look at it and you go, it's almost inconceivable you could do it any other way than the way that it's taught. If you sort of, you know, there's the music, here's the technique, and it's, you know, the pathway is like a furrow, you know, that's the way you're going to go. Because with the guitar, it's like, well, okay, how do you want to play it? It's almost like, how do you want to play it? Because everything I tell you, don't do that, there'll be some amazing player who does exactly what you're told not to do out there, you know, technically or whatever. And the guitar seems to be the most extreme version of that.
Mm.
You know. So that I find interesting that, you know, you were playing and were obviously very good musically in all those early instruments, and yet you still said that's what happened to you when you looked at music. It was like, well,
Yeah.
let's learn this because it's just easier to memorise this and play.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like I say, with the piano, particularly more so than the violin, I would say, I struggled with reading music. You'd think it'd be easier on the piano for reasons of, but I don't know what it was with that. The violin, I always could read easier. It's strange. I don't know what the mechanics of that is. Why that could be possible? It doesn't. It's illogical. But then with the guitar, I was just doing everything by ear for quite a number of years, and even though I was carrying on with the classical stuff, the whole ethos of, you know, rock and pop and Jimi Hendrix and all this stuff was very different. The whole lifestyle and everything from classical, although it isn't really when you look through the history properly. No. But you know, the perception of it.
Yeah.
So at the time, it was a bit like, I'm doing this classical thing, but that's, you know, I'm doing the rock and pop, and that was far more interesting to me at that time, because my interest in it got more so, and all the other things that went on with it, the characters and all of that were like seemed more colourful and interesting, you know, and all of that. And like I say, with that, I was doing everything by ear. So at that time, I had two separate kind of music paths, if you like. The classical with reading, which I wasn't that great at. The pop and rock and blah, 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 which was all by ear. And they were kind of quite separate at the time. Some years later, I got interested a bit more in jazz. I always used to love jazz. They used to have programs on the TV. I've forgotten what the program was now. Every week, you know, with what's her name? What's the husband and wife? Oh,
Johnny Dankworth and Cleo.
Yeah, they had a show, I think.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
and that's a great players from America come over there, and I used to watch these people, and I loved all that. You know, so I loved listening to it. Yeah. But I sort of shied away from the idea of playing jazz. I didn't have any lessons on the guitar, which I kind of regret now in some ways. But at the time, it was the last thing I wanted to do, because all the lessons and all of that kind of academic thing, I just thought, I'm doing that, and I've done a lot of that with this thing over here, and there's something, aspects of it I didn't like. Not the music, it was the whole thing. Yeah. And this is like freedom over here with the rock and pop and stuff. But then, like I say, I got interested in the idea of playing some jazz things, and then you'd hear some people in the pop and rock world which were sort of a bit jazz influenced to some degree.
Yes.
And all of a sudden I got interested in the, you know, I remember I bought this record, it was like from the 40s, Charlie Parker and all of that. It was like, wow. And Django Reinhardt. And I used to try and work out Django Reinhardt stuff and things like that. Yeah. And then I've started buying some books, because jazz, unlike pop and rock and blues, which came reasonably easy to me in a playing way. Yeah. The jazz thing, I think I didn't listen to enough of it. I didn't immerse myself enough in it for it to become enough part of my listening experience that you kind of internalize, or whatever the word is. Yeah. And so I found the jazz I found was, I had the idea of it. I mean, it's not an easy form of music, but what I mean is I ended up, my thinkingness about it was, this is difficult music, blah, blah, blah. Now, an example of what I'm talking about in the reverse is quite a few years later, I've been playing a lot of rock and pop stuff by that time, and some folk and all sorts of stuff, and but not really any jazz. And I had a friend when I lived in Hastings. He was playing bass, mostly rock and things like that, but he got in with this pianist. He was a teacher, not of music, just his job, but he was a great pianist and like a music enthusiast of every kind, jazz, world music and all of that. And he formed this quintet or quartet or something, and this friend of mine somehow ended up playing the bass with him. And he used to play every week, because locally. And then after a while they said, "Oh, do you want to come and play with this band?" And I thought, I can't play jazz, But I thought, wow, this is an experience. I might learn something here. By that time, like I was saying, I was trying to work out Django Reinhardt thing. But that's very different from listening to a lot of jazz and knowing the sounds of everything. So I went to that and I struggled with it really. But one of the guys on that band was a trumpet player. He was not a professional trumpet player. It was just for fun kind of thing. But he was very good, and it intrigued me because I remember one of the tunes we did, and I've forgotten what it was called now, I'll be honest, but it had lots of chord changes in it. Which by that time I'd had a book learning different jazz chords, and I could play the chord changes. But doing a solo on top of this, I was like, and I was at this thing where I was thinking I was learning different scales, and the what I would say is a kind of mistake, I think, in a way, to approach playing jazz, but easy to fall into.
Yes.
Is like what I think of painting by numbers kind of thing, and you think that chord is this scale, whatever it is, this other chord, that sort of thing. So then you're thinking. Like rabbit in the headlights. You're just trying to play something awkwardly from this scale, on that, and it's just not even musical.
Totally.
So at that time, that was me in that little band, and the trumpet player, he would play very simple, really funky, kind of beautiful things. It wasn't fast really, but I remember when on that particular tune, he just had no problem with it. It was fantastic. I said to him, what are you doing on that? Because I couldn't work out, it sounds fantastic what you're playing. What scale are you playing here? He said, I don't know. He said, I don't do it, that's not what I do. I said, what do you do? He said, well, I do, I just listen to the melody of the tune and I kind of improvise around there a bit. And I thought, aha. And that was like, I see.
That is brilliant what you just said there, because when I was trying to set up Blues Camp, because all what you were saying about jazz and all the rest of it, totally, I was great playing the chords, no problem, but when it came to like solo, I was, you know that you're a bit of a fake. So anyway, when I was doing the setting up Blues Camp, I went on a Jamie Abersole jazz course. And he does used to do all those backing tracks to me and things, which were a lot of jazz musicians used to use as warm up and that sort of stuff. Anyway, a lot of the tutors were, they were in the Jazz Messengers or whatever, they were real top players.
Wow.
And what was interesting was doing the course, and I was there just to find out how the format worked, because that's what I was going to do. But doing the course, it was like you had to put your jazz head on. And one of the guys turned around and said, well, what do you need to know to play a jazz song? Well, you need to know the chords and that strange thing called the melody. And of course, if you come out of the world of rock, it's like you don't know what the singer's doing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Whoever's holding that melody, you don't give a damn about that. And it's the completely 180 degrees away from that sort of mentality. And of course, if you look at all that early jazz recordings, Louis Armstrong, for instance, what's he doing? He's playing the tune.
Yeah.
He's playing the tune. And you think, because the tune navigates its way around the chords. Yeah. That's it. So if you know what the melodies do, it's like Stefan Grappelli. You listen to the Stefan Grappelli lines. They're really the melody, aren't they? Yeah. With some sort of embellishment, which makes it sound astonishingly brilliant. But he's not coming out of that thing about the scale.
Yeah.
The harmony of the chords, but you can get that from the chord. You hear the chord, and if you've got a good ear, like these guys did, you can hang a melody over the top of it.
Yeah.
But it's a revelation, isn't it, when you come out of that?
I realised when I with that trumpet player, but I should have really taken it on board more than I did, because when I think about it now, very often the thing is back to front. What I mean by that is, here's an example. The only time I went to do a jazz course years ago, and when I was living in Hastings, I went up to London and for a week just. It was very, very good, and in a way, it was brilliant. Having said that, they had some jazz tunes, Charlie Parker, fairly simple ones, bluesy ones, and so on. But one of the first things that they did, so they tell you what the chords were, and they give you a sheet with all the chords, the scales from those chords. And when I think about it now, I'm thinking it makes sense. That's back to front to be teaching people what the scale pattern, even though that's very useful. Because the first thing I think is to learn the melody. And in fact, when I think about the history of jazz, like you're saying with Louis Armstrong, because that's totally true, that trumpet player I played with in that band was like that sort of approach, really. And but with the tradition of jazz, when it sort of advanced a bit, they were using very often pop tunes, which they added chords to and so on. So therefore it was a song. It was song-based music, melodic music, and then obviously people were trying to do experimental stuff with it, and from that it ended up, you got bebop and things where people were, what would you call it, delving more into the harmonic stuff of it and doing something creative with it.
That seems like a good place to stop, and we'll be picking up on that story in a couple of episodes' time. So until next time, all the best.